This is Bob Kevane, 2017 President of the Greater San Diego Association of Realtors. Welcome to this month's edition of The Scoop. Today I'll be interviewing Dr. Norman Miller, one of our region's foremost authorities in real estate. Norm Miller is Hahn Chair of Real Estate Finance in the University of San Diego School of Business and is affiliated with the university's Burnham Moore Center for Real Estate. He is editor of the Journal of Sustainable Real Estate, which he founded in 2009. Good morning, Norm.
Good morning, Bob.
How did you end up teaching at the University of San Diego?
My daughter moved to San Diego 5 years before I did. She kept lobbying us, come on out, we'll give you some grandchildren. My wife and I finally succumbed to the lure of grandchildren. We moved out here. The Burnham Moore Center in the University of San Diego was an attraction. I really liked the president and the provost and the dean at the time, so I joined the University of San Diego and Burnham Moore Center.
I understand that you've been published several times. What are some of the areas of focus for your studies?
I work in housing, forecasting, valuation studies. I work in mortgage risk analysis, sustainable real estate, one of my side passions. And of course, recently I've been looking more at regional California and San Diego issues as well.
Great. Now I'd like to change the direction of the conversation and talk with you about a proposition that is dear to my heart. Proposition 13, officially named the People's Initiative to Limit Property Taxation. It goes without saying that Proposition 13 is tremendously popular among property owners in our state who get to take advantage of this important opportunity to essentially lock in low property tax rates. But in your recent study, you discussed some of the very interesting findings about the impact of Prop 13 on tax issue turnover and home prices.
That's right. Back when I was in Cincinnati, I noticed that there was something weird about California. The turnover for the state as a whole was lower than any other state on a per household basis. And I didn't really understand why. But it was a curiosity that I had known about for some time. Come out to California, and I was told by colleagues, don't touch Prop 13, it's suicide politically. And of course, they were talking about equity issues, and that's been discussed a lot. But I was curious about something else, the point you raised, turnover. If Prop 13 reduces turnover, does that mean we have reduced supply? Does that artificially affect prices? Does that mean that people are in houses that they don't fit because they're too large or too small, or they don't fix them up, or they don't fix them up legally? And if we don't sell homes because we like the attraction of having a Prop 13 property tax base, then the economy suffers in many ways. We don't have the turnover, we don't have the moving, we don't have the furniture bought, we don't have people living in right-sized homes. There's all kinds of economic consequences. So I don't believe anybody's ever studied this before, turnover. And so I studied every neighborhood in San Diego County, looked at the average effective property tax rate, and examined the turnover. And that was the beginning of this study, and did that, as you say, a couple of years ago.
Of particular interest to me is the lock-in effect that you described and what it means for property turnover rates. Can you take a moment to define the lock-in effect and share your findings?
Well, if we look at the average effective property tax rates, one of the things I was curious about is what do people really pay? And even though you know that the effective full taxation would be at a little bit over 1%, and some special assessments. In San Diego County, we're very typical of the state. We're just a little bit over 0.6%, which means that that's the average. Some people below that, some people, newer homeowners, above that. In some neighborhoods, that effective property tax rate is 0.2%, or for some individuals, 1%. If you are in a home with very low property tax base, you're not going to sell. because the present value of that economic benefit is just too much. So it is a lock-in effect. The older neighborhoods and the longer you've lived in a home, the greater is going to be that lock-in effect. And if we carry it out further, it gets even worse with this inheritance situation, in the sense that, we carry this thing out for 2 or 3 generations without any modifications. We're going to have even lower turnover in California because of that lock-in effect. It will get worse and worse and worse because you just won't be able to afford to give up that benefit.
Certainly a lot of our agents know that we don't have inventory. And you've put this in some words that we can now understand, and one of the big reasons why we have this lock-in. But what does this mean for property taxes from the perspective of the state and local municipalities?
Well, you're raising a few issues. And I mean, one of them is the greater the lock-in over time, the more they need to find taxes from other places. So it'd be nice to encourage turnover, but all of the ancillary services related to moving, they lose all those sales tax revenues. They lose all those revenues, income revenues that you would get by letting people have more turnover, all the economic benefits that are triggered by turnover. So the multiplier effect, I'm sure, is extensive. I haven't tried to quantify it, but the effect on turnover is significant. And again, this is something that we need to study a little bit more to examine just what would it mean if we changed the policies and the laws. But my guess, without doing that study, is that it would be very significant that we would have more turnover if somehow we could free up mobility and escape the lock-in.
You're absolutely right with respect to that. I mean, we are losing jobs that we could have if we had more turnover and could build more houses. We're having lower income houses available to people in the low income, because we aren't moving generally like we did for years from the lower income up to the newer houses. So it precludes a lot of new house building also. There's a lot of other reasons why we don't have new house building, but that's certainly, I think, one of the big ones is the fact if people aren't moving, we're not going to be building a lot of new houses.
Well, it does reduce mobility significantly, but it also has an artificial effect on prices. Our prices go up a little bit more in those neighborhoods, and I don't want to pick on neighborhoods in a negative way. Go ahead. All right. So as an example, Coronado would be an example where they pay much lower than average property taxes because the residents have lived there longer, not because they get lower property tax rates. What happens is because nobody's willing to sell their home, you get this artificial constriction of supply. That makes the prices higher than they would otherwise be. So if we can encourage mobility and allow people to sell their homes, we also would get price increases, but not as high in those neighborhoods like Coronado and Mission Hills. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're going to be valuable neighborhoods, but instead of going up maybe 7%, they may have gone up 5% because there would have been a little more supply out there. And so if we can figure out a way to encourage supply and also nip in the bud some of these long-term problems before they get even worse, that would be great.
Well, certainly California has an overwhelming tax structure, not just the property taxes. But this law encourages important investment in property ownership, and which has helped thousands of families to build equity and to afford to live in our state.
Well, it does, except that I would argue that California probably has more illegal home improvement than any state in the country as a result of it as well. People are so fearful of triggering reassessment that they do, they do all their kitchen and bath remodeling and all their room fix-ups without legal permits. So we have kind of a black market encouraged by Prop 13 and the fear of reassessment.
I think you're absolutely right with that. Supervisor Diane Jacobs says that there's over 500,000 properties in the county that have been a lot of building on them without building permits. And I don't think it's that people don't want to get a permit. If the process was easy, there wouldn't be a problem. I mean, the process is difficult, plus it does raise their assessed values.
Yeah, you raised a point that maybe we can encourage things like granny flats without affecting the other property tax base. If that fear was lower, we could add a little bit to the supply, which would be great for San Diego and great in California.
Certainly the state of California is almost dictating that with their most recent laws. We'll have to see how that plays out in the city of San Diego, because for years we've pushed this granny flat. And over a period of 5 or 6 years, we found that we got 12 granny flats in the entire city of San Diego. Hopefully, with this new law and the encouragement from the state, we will figure out a way to let people build these units on their property, because I agree it would be not only great as people get older and they need somebody to live with them, or sometimes their kids come back, and it certainly is nicer if they're in a different structure than within their actual own house. And so I look at that as a real possibility, and hopefully that will work.
I hope you're right. But back on Prop 13, I do hope that we can make some modifications to encourage turnover somehow. Again, we need more study on that. And part of my concern is this inheritance law might take it too far, and we don't realize just what will happen down the road. But I hope we can have some study and figure it out and get some policy changes.
Well, you and I have talked about this for a long time, and for about the last 11 years, I've been working on to push a solution to this problem through my property tax portability plan. In short, you would be able to carry over your lower property tax, which would be an incentive to move rather than put that extra room above your garage or something as the kids get older and you need more space. And so consequently, for example, if you had a assessed value of $200,000 on your house and you sold it for $500,000 and bought one for $700,000, the first $500,000, that $200,000 would carry over, and then you'd pick up the difference. Under the laws as they exist now, you can do this one time after age 55, but you can only go straight across or down. You can't go up. And I've been working with Senator Bob Dutton in California, because in Pasadena, where his district is, his people have been wanting to move from two-story houses as they get older to one-story houses, but the one-story houses cost more than the two-story houses, and so consequently they're precluded from moving. But because we've had this rule in California for some time that if it was going to cost any money, it was automatically thrown into suspense, because the state does static analysis versus dynamic analysis, and so consequently they think if you have one house sale, they're going to lose money. They don't realize, and I've certainly thought for a long period of time, and you've heard me talk about this, that the overall revenue to the state would go up significantly, not only from property taxes, but that we'd put everybody back to work, the contractors would be back in the state of California building new houses, and Home Depots and everybody. We all know that when somebody sells a house or a property or buys that property, they spend more money in that year before they sell or in that year after than they do the whole time they own the property. So if we could get some normal turnover here, I think that the whole economy would work. The property taxes not only would increase overall while they would retain, but the income taxes would increase, salaries would increase because we'd have more jobs, and it would all kind of work out. So what do you think about that?
I think it's a little bit complicated, and it's a little bit easier for you to understand as a CPA than maybe the average person. But I do think that anything that we can do to encourage turnover is a good thing for California, good thing for San Diego. And so policy changes in that direction, I would applaud in terms of the economic effects. We should study that. And I think there could be some trade-offs. And maybe your suggestion even has some wiggle room here or there, but anything that we can do to let people fit in the right size home and encourage turnover is a good thing.
Certainly, Norm, thank you very, very much for today. Mine has wiggle room to the extent that it makes sense. Otherwise, I want to be relatively firm with respect to some of it. But certainly there are wiggle rooms, but you don't negotiate against yourself before you start the process. And we need to get the facts, and we're working on getting those facts at the San Diego Association of Realtors. And you have certainly helped me with different universities and talking to them, and I look forward to us moving forward and getting this answered, because we're not trying to do something just because we're trying to get more inventory to sell. We're trying to help the state generate more revenue and at the same time get the economy going the way that it used to be back in the 50s and 60s.
Right.
And so thank you so much for being here today. It was great. I always enjoy talking to you, and I hope to see you again sometime.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Norm, for taking the time to meet with us today. The San Diego Association of Realtors looks forward to continuing and learning from you in the future. This is Bob Kevane, President for 2017, signing off from the Scoop. See you next time.